The following is an HDNet original presentation.
Tonight,
He looked at me and he says, "Are you doing okay?" And I said, "I'm flipping."
after a Tea Party drubbing, a senator from Alaska has a decision to make: quit or fight back.
To hell with politics. Let's do what's right for Alaska. Let's win!
A look at an historic November battle between one Republican who is all about compromise when necessary and a Tea Party candidate who wants to send a message.
I mean, you cannot sit back and call this a Democratic problem. It's a compromise problem. And that compromise is destroying the nation.
And the Middle East erupts. You've seen the pictures. We give you context, perspective, and analysis about what's really going on.
People went into the street to contest a despot. They didn't say Islam is the solution. They just were saying, get out.
We'll bring you the news tonight on Dan Rather Reports. Good evening. The pollsters who track politics will tell you that there is no group with a lower job approval rating than members of the United States Congress. At the end of last year, according to Gallup, only 13% of Americans believed Congress was doing a good job. That's a record low. Why the bad numbers? Americans say their Washington politicians are too ideological, too polarized, and they spend too much money. But what if there was a senator who won re-election without the backing of her party and now says she feels liberated to vote as she pleases, wants to compromise sometimes, and is beholden to no one except her constituents? Lisa Murkowski, a Republican senator from Alaska, says that's exactly what happened to her. This is the story of how the senator won re-election against great odds and became a different politician in the process. At Lisa Murkowski's swearing in last January, the look on Vice President Biden's face said it all. The odds of her being there were, according to experts, somewhere between slim and none.
What you're about to enter, so help you God.
I do.
Congratulations, Lisa.
Ms. Murkowski of Alaska.
In ceremonies and swearing-ins throughout the day, hundreds of well-wishers were there as Murkowski made history. Well, you know, Americans, whatever their political party, race, color, creed, or religion, they like a get-up fighter.
Yeah.
They love a comeback story. And yours is one now. Did you ever think you'd live this kind of comeback story?
Nope. The thought of running a write-in has never even entered my mind. Made it.
Most political experts believed Murkowski would be back in Alaska by now, and that her office would be occupied by hard-right conservative Republican and Tea Party favorite Joe Miller. Murkowski was stunned in the primary by Miller, who was strongly supported by former Governor Sarah Palin.
Miller's lifetime of achievement and personal accomplishment will make him a great U.S. Senator for Alaska. A graduate from
Miller graduated from West Point and Yale Law School. He had served in Iraq during the first Gulf War and then moved his family to Alaska in 1994, where he worked in a law firm and then became a district court judge.
This is the kind of change that's going to carry over. Not just
A political conservative through and through, he had supported Palin's run for governor in 2006. But few in Alaska expected a relative unknown to pull off an upset in the primary, an upset that would reverberate across the country. After the primary, with the results becoming conclusive, Murkowski knew she had to place a phone call politicians hate to make, one conceding a race.
I saw it. It was like, "You've lost the primary, Lisa. You know, what are you going to do?" And so I called Mr. Miller and told him that, you know, we're watching the absentees just as you are. but they clearly are not trending my way, and it clearly appears that I have lost this primary election. And so I am calling you to concede the election. And it was an interesting call because it'd been pretty heated in the weeks prior to the run-up to the primary, and pretty aggressive battle there. But there was no word of thanks. You did a good job. It was basically a call that said, you know, so how are you going to help me now?
Did he actually ask you that?
He did. He did. And I have to admit, I was a little more than taken aback.
Because, one, he didn't say, well, thank you for the call.
Thank you for the call.
Tough race, you ran a
Thank
hard
you.
race.
You ran a good race, and you know, we'll move on here. None of that. Next day in the newspaper, Mr. Miller was quoted as saying, I got a call from Lisa Murkowski when she called to concede, and I offered my thanks and congratulated her.
Which he had not done.
Which he had not done. He clearly had not done.
Question. If he had handled that telephone call differently, if he had handled it as most winning candidates do when the losing candidate calls to concede, is it possible you wouldn't have run?
It might have made a difference. It might have made a difference.
In an era of knockdown, drag-out politics, Lisa Murkowski says she's more about civility and graciousness. And while the phone call was painful, the defeat was stunning.
I think it took kind of everyone by surprise.
At a popular coffee shop in Anchorage, we caught up with Steve Wachowski, who had been the senator's communications director during her campaign. He told us some of her supporters had voted for her opponent, not expecting him to actually win.
I talked to a lot of Alaskans that would call and apologize to me, and they said, you know, I voted for Joe Miller just to send Lisa a message that I like her, but she's not conservative enough.
And so he was singing, and he was singing.
Lisa Murkowski has a history of not always being conservative enough for Alaska's voters, and this wasn't her first brush with near death in politics. A born and bred Alaskan, with 5 siblings, a slew of cousins and nieces and nephews, not to mention a husband and 2 sons now back in Washington, Lisa was first a lawyer in Anchorage before being elected to the Alaskan State House in Juneau in 1998. There, she voted to increase taxes on alcohol and came out against a bill to restrict abortion. Not popular moves in Alaska. In 2002, she fought off a primary challenge and won by only 57 votes.
Hey, pay tribute to Caesar.
Then she was off to Washington, courtesy of her father, Senator Frank Murkowski. He appointed her in his place after he was elected governor of Alaska. Lisa served 2 years, ran again on her own, and won another 6-year term. Frank Murkowski proved to be an unpopular governor, especially after he bought a multi-million-dollar jet on the state dime. Lisa Murkowski's father was taken down in 2006 by Alaska's other famous female politician, Sarah Palin.
This was the spirit that brought me to the governor's office when I took on the old politics as usual in Juneau. That luxury jet was over the top. I put it on eBay.
On the small stage that is Alaska politics, the Palins and the Murkowskis are not exactly close. Well, here comes the questions you must have anticipated. Sarah Palin, former governor, she has a definition of what a Republican is. Where do you stand vis-a-vis former Governor Palin? Do you talk to her? Do you agree with her? Let's talk about it.
We have not had that much communication since she left as governor. While she was in office, we had a very professional working relationship. It's interesting, though, because there has been this effort, and I will blame the media. I will point the finger there, to suggest that there's some kind of bad blood or there's a family feud that goes on between the Palins and the Murkowskis. In fairness, there just is not. We just don't have that much interaction or have had that much of a previous relationship.
But Murkowski has been quoted as saying that Sarah Palin was out for her own self-interest and not Alaska's. Palin has countered that Murkowski was just another Democrat in the Senate.
She has now since moved on, and we don't have that professional relationship.
Tea Party Americans, you're winning.
While Sarah Palin was gaining national attention for the Tea Party, Lisa Murkowski was making a name for herself as a Republican who would reach across the aisle. With seats on the Appropriations and Energy Committees, she was popular in a state that's all about oil.
How liberal is Lisa Murkowski?
But when the economy tanked, Alaskans were furious at Washington, and Lisa Murkowski became a target.
At that same time, the Tea Party Express dumped about, and this is the outside Tea Party wing from California, had dumped $400,000 into our race in like the last 5 days, included mailers, radio ads, and TV. They at a point had outspent us 4-1 on our ads. They just went negative hard, and they harnessed that kind of anger that I think was so prevalent within kind of the Tea Party ranks, or the people that supported the Tea Party.
Good to see you, Wayne.
But after the primary and Lisa's loss, a funny thing happened. People started coming out of the woodwork to urge her to run as a write-in candidate. Her cousin, Annie Gore, remembers one particular encounter at an Anchorage restaurant called Kenley's.
I walked over, and the first thing she sort of turned to me and she said, "I got a standing ovation when I came into the restaurant." And I said, "Well, that's cool." Okay. We sat down, and waiter came over, and he sort of looked at me, and then he looked at Lisa, and then he did a double take, and he launched into this diatribe of, "Senator, you have to run. You have to do this. This can't be the end of what your career was. You've done so much." And he just sort of went on. And I was thinking, can we order? I'm really hungry. And he just sort of kept going on.
All those well-wishers urging her to do something, and that less than satisfying phone call with Joe Miller were having an impact. Murkowski and her family began seriously considering a write-in campaign, something the experts told her was impossible, according to her sister Carol.
At the same time, she's getting this encouragement from everyday people. The powers that be in Washington and the Republican Party hierarchy saying, a write-in will not work. You can't win with a write-in. It'll never happen. You can't get the money. You can't. A name like Murkowski. How are you going to teach people how to spell that? It's just not going to work.
It could also be political suicide. If she split the vote and a Democrat won, the Republican Party would never forgive her. Finally, it came down to a fateful family dinner and a coin toss.
So we sat down, had a lovely dinner, and talked about all the pros and cons, and the evening went on, and finally, we're at the end of the evening, and I had to get on a very early morning plane to come back here to Washington, D.C. I said, no, we're not leaving. We're going to open up a bottle of champagne, and we're going to celebrate a decision.
But we weren't getting anywhere, and no decisions were being made. Nothing was happening. And Ann said, "I've got a quarter." So we flipped the
quarter, and I had it on my hand.
And you wouldn't look.
I couldn't bear to look, because we said, "What is it going to be, Lisa, heads or tails?" She said, "If it's heads, I'm going to run." I was like, "I can't look. I can't." Carol pried my fingers up, and then she just put them down. And no, she didn't say anything. And she just smiled.
Heads.
And she said, "It's heads."
We looked around the table and said, well, I guess that must mean we're going.
To hell with politics. Let's do what's right for Alaska. Let's win!
With the flip of a coin, Murkowski had gone from being the Washington insider to the Alaskan upstart. That part of the story is next. If ever it can be said that a picture doesn't tell the whole story, then this would be a good example. Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas is all smiles congratulating Lisa Murkowski.
Well, you did it with grace and
But Cornyn, head of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, unleashed his war chest, spending nearly $500,000 in advertising to defeat Murkowski. Well, that couldn't have made you feel very good.
Well, no, but I knew that I was putting myself in a very unique position. I knew that I was putting my Republican colleagues in a very awkward position. And did I expect anything different? I guess I did.
It got so bad, Murkowski couldn't get a single political consulting firm in the lower 48 on board. And she only had 6 weeks between her announcement of the write-in and the election. That's when she went Alaskan, hiring an Anchorage firm to produce spots like these.
To re-elect Lisa Murkowski, you must fill in the oval and write in her name.
Murkowski, Murkowski.
That is correct.
It's time for a return to common sense. Time to return Lisa Murkowski to Washington.
I'm Lisa Murkowski, and I approve this message.
And then the tide began to turn. Joe Miller bragged via Twitter that he needed to pick out office furniture in Washington. He hired security guards who handcuffed one reporter at a rally at a public school.
They handcuffed me, and then they called the police.
If you don't leave right now, I'm going to put you in handcuffs too.
And who are you? What's your name?
You're trespassing, sir.
What's your name?
And threatened another reporter. Miller blamed a novice political operation for the blunders, but his poll numbers continued to drop.
You can ask me about background, you can ask me about personal issues. I'm not going to answer. I'm not.
Wow, what a good crowd! Wow!
On November 2nd, Murkowski defeated Miller by 10,000 votes, thanks to a broad coalition of Democrats and independents like Sylvia Lang.
She's an Alaskan kind of gal. I mean, she just went for it, and I salute that, frankly.
And especially Alaska natives who turned out in force.
I actually voted Republican for the very first time.
No last name. You want? Oh, please. Oh. You want me to spell it?
Yes.
We all had to.
We all had to learn. Yep.
As for Joe Miller, he's gone home to Fairbanks. But even after the wear and tear of an ugly campaign, he says he isn't giving up the cause.
But this is why we did what we did. It's for their future.
Miller invited us over to meet his family and to see his impressive trophy collection.
The Dall sheep were all shot while I was a magistrate out in Tok. That's the interior part of the state, about 90 miles from the Canadian border. This is a mountain goat. I shot it outside of Ketchikan.
And in a rare post-election interview, he said he may have missed his target this time around, but don't rule him out for another run. And Miller had a message for Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell.
He needs to understand, though, that the demands of the Tea Party are not just window dressing. We don't want to just see symbolic votes, but what we have to see is real action. There is power in the Senate amongst the Republicans to stop spending. The question is, do they have the backbone to do it?
Miller says he has zero faith in Murkowski's ability to do it and thinks her re-election will only unleash her inner liberal.
I think that she's gone even more to the left now. I think she feels that she's more liberated to act in a way that isn't consistent necessarily with what, the fundamentals of the Republican Party would expect.
Joe Miller, whom you eventually defeated, spoke to us, and he said, and this is a paraphrase but a pretty direct quote, that a lot of people like you, said he, wear the label of Republican who deep down are really, quote, big government types. What do you think?
Well, whose definition of Republican? Is it Joe Miller's definition of Republican?
And to reach across the aisle on the eve of the State of the Union address, she urged lawmakers to lay down their battle axes and mix it up.
So maybe we do need to get out of our conventional skins every now and again and come out and do something that indicates to the rest of the country that we're not afraid to sit next to one another. There are no cooties to be had, Republican between Democrats.
But Miller and the Tea Party are in no mood for backslapping and compromise.
It is the art of compromise on the growth of government, that has gotten Republicans into the same ship that the Democrats are in. I mean, you cannot sit back and call this a Democratic problem. It's a compromise problem. And that compromise is destroying the nation.
I firmly disagree. Firmly disagree. Compromise does not mean you're giving up on your principles or your convictions. It means being humble enough to recognize that others might also have something to contribute. And so let's allow for that contribution into the mix and build something that is good for everybody.
So tonight I challenge you to join
But
me in setting
the
a new
internal rift between the establishment Republican Party and the Tea Party was
come
in
from
full
clean
display
energy
after the
sources.
State of the Union, when Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann taped a separate Tea Party message to the Republican response.
Last November, you went to the polls and you voted out the big spending politicians.
In your opinion, based on your experience, can the Republican Party hold itself together? Can it have unison? Or is it going to be a case of the Tea Party people who feel passionately about their positions being in so much opposition that it tears the party apart? Help us out here.
There clearly are some struggles as we try to figure out, is the Tea Party part of the Republican Party? Is it something that we want to encourage to stay away and be separate? How is there an integration, if there is one at all? Is this better for the party? Do we need to be more moderate and inclusive in our views? That's where I happen to come from in a perspective. I'm one who is a big tent Republican. That's what I'd like to get us back to, instead of this more narrow, exclusive
Senator,
party.
what are the chances? You've made it very clear you haven't left the party. You said, listen, I'm a Republican. But what are the chances that you haven't left the party with the parties in the process of leaving you?
Metaphorically, that may be the direction that things ultimately go. I don't feel that right now. I do feel that there is a certain, I hesitate to call it freedom, but for lack of a better term right now, an opportunity for me as a lawmaker, as a policymaker, to focus more on the wants and needs and desires of the people that I represent, as opposed to kind of the strictures and the confines of a party.
If you look at the most recent 4 votes that she made during the lame duck Congress, in fact, I think she was the only Republican that voted for all of the 4 signal votes that came up just very recently. The DREAM Act, the tax cut compromise, the don't ask, don't tell. She was on the wrong side of the START vote from my perspective as well. And that was really reflective of what she was doing even prior to my involvement in this race.
Are you going to go to the White House? You're going to talk to President Obama?
I hope
Have you
so.
done it already?
I have not. I haven't been invited to the White House yet.
You said you hope so.
I hope so.
But a showdown with the White House could be looming over oil, the lifeblood of Alaska's economy. The Obama administration has threatened to classify more of the state as wilderness, cutting it off from all drilling. And offshore drilling is already big in Cook Inlet, south of Anchorage, and the oil industry wants to go north to waters of the Arctic. The government leased rights to Conoco and Shell for more than $2 billion, but has so far refused to give the companies drilling permits. I want to come back to where you are now. You're liberated. You can do anything you want to do. You have power. Let's talk about the Energy Committee.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in your campaign, and I think you would be among the first to say, and if not, tell me, that it was key for you to get infusions of fairly heavy money at a critical time, that your write-in candidacy had very little chance unless you could get infusion money. A lot of that money came from energy companies, oil companies. Is it
Not in my write-in, no.
No?
No. What we saw during the write-in campaign was a great deal of assistance from Alaskans. Remember, most people on the outside did not believe I had a snowball's chance in making this write-in. And so what we saw in terms of the dollars coming into my campaign, my write-in campaign, was a lot of Alaskan money.
But she has in the past received big money from big oil. The record shows that the energy industry has been by far her largest contributor since Murkowski came to Washington.
I don't know who it is that gives me money. I don't look at my FEC report to see, okay, has this person given me a donation and should I sit down with them? Or the reverse, this person has given me a donation, so I need to sit down with them. And I know that people think, well, of course, she must be doing that. She must do that. I don't do that.
Lisa Murkowski has lived all over Alaska and still knows her way around a mountain, all the while still talking about policy, even on the ski lift.
But then it's not just the outreach, it's then what you deliver back.
It was 8 degrees that day.
You keep moving and nothing's too cold.
The question is, which direction? In the race for the soul of the Republican Party, there are 2 women politicians in Alaska who see things very differently. While Lisa Murkowski has just been reelected to her job in Washington, Sarah Palin says she's not yet decided about running for the White House. If she should run and get the nomination, as a Republican, you'd support her.
Well, tell me who she's running against.
Well, that leaves open the question then.
Well, I tell you, and again, people want to try to get me in a box and taking on Sarah Palin.
Well, I'm trying as best I can.
And that's not my intention, is to take her on, not in any way. I respect what she has done. She is clearly an individual who is able to motivate and to inspire people, not just in Alaska, but around the country. So I have no design to kind of bring her down or impugn her in any way. But I really have not, at this point, made a decision as to who I will support for president at all. But in the primary, I don't think it will be Sarah Palin.
Well, you said it would depend on against whom she might be running. A Palin versus Obama, where would you be?
You are really making it tough for me. Should I say that we have proven that write-in campaigns can actually work?
Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski. Straight ahead on our program, the Middle East. Understanding what's really going on. That's next. And now, the Middle East. First Tunisia, then Yemen, then Egypt erupts. You've seen the pictures as longtime rulers try to hold on to power and thousands of demonstrators take to the streets. But what does it mean for the region and for the United States? There are few people who can better explain the complexities of the Middle East than our old friend and colleague, Dr. Fuad Ajami of Stanford and Johns Hopkins Universities. Fuad, first of all, thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Always good to see you.
Thank you.
Give us an overview, based on your experience, your long study of not only the region, but Egypt specifically. Put a frame around what has happened in Egypt in recent days and is happening now.
Well, I think fundamentally, if you take a look at the tumult that began in a very big way on January 25, this really was the so-called Day of Anger. That's when Egypt exploded against its pharaoh. We have to call him for what he is. He's a pharaoh. He started out as a modest man who wanted to serve 2 terms as president and be gone. That was the promise he made to his country when he inherited power in 1981 after the assassination of his predecessor, Anwar Sadat. 30 years later, the modest man had, in fact, transformed into a pharaoh. And I think what we've seen is the hatred of the people of Egypt for him. Hosni Mubarak has become a truly radicalizing, explosive figure. He's become the face of everything ugly in the system. And I think in many ways, Mubarak has himself become such a polarizing figure. I mean, look at the young people. The chants are just one word. Irhal, irhal, be gone. You know, a whole country is asking a man to just get out. They don't want to kill him. It's an interesting feature of Egyptian culture. They never killed their pharaohs. I think there was only one that may have been killed, I mean, in ancient time and one in modern times. But they want him gone, there's no doubt. So whatever happens next, we can make the following observation. The house of Mubarak has fallen. The house of the dictator has fallen. The influence of his wife has ended. The influence of his son has ended. The idea his son would inherit him is now no more. So whatever happens in Egypt, they now have served notice on Pharaoh.
You mentioned the wife,
Yes.
Suzanne, as a factor.
Sure.
Tell me about that.
Well, you know, there is something very peculiar about Arab courts and Arab dynasties. On the surface, they are really a male affair and a male culture. But behind the scenes, there is this tremendous influence of the wives. In the case of both Egypt and Tunisia, which had started this whole tumult in the Arab world, in the case of Tunisia, it had been the hairdresser, the wife of the president who became a power in her own right. In the case of Suzanne Mubarak, again, she started out as the modest wife of an Air Force officer, because that's what Mubarak was. Again, many years later, there is no relation to where these people began. They developed all kinds of ambitions. They grew enormously rich. They grew enormously ambitious. And they came to think of Egypt, the Mubaraks came to think of Egypt as their own domain, that this is their domain, this is their country.
Well, in the case of the wife, Suzanne Mubarak, do you or do you not think the idea of having him succeeded by his son may have come for her?
Absolutely. It was actually Mrs. Mubarak who thought their son, their younger son, because they have two sons, one is named Ala, and he specializes in looting the economy, and one Jamal, and he specializes in bidding for power, that he will inherit his father's domain. It was Mrs. Mubarak who conceived of this project. The idea that Hosni Mubarak himself on his own would dream of his son becoming president is unthinkable. Think of him this way. He's the third in a row among these military officers who came to power. There was the great Jamal Abdel Nasser in the 50s and 60s, and then, of course, Anwar Sadat, and then Hosni Mubarak. Neither Nasser, with his grandeur, you know, the greatest Arab, it was said, since the Prophet Muhammad, neither Nasser nor Sadat thought of their children as their successors. But Mubarak thought in such terms, and he's paying a price for it.
Well, why is the Middle East seeing these kinds of developments? Tunisia, Egypt, we're seeing some signs in Yemen and elsewhere. Why is this happening now?
I wish I knew. I'd get a prize of some kind if I really could answer this question. There is something about revolutions. I think they're always inevitable only in hindsight. Like in hindsight, people tell you, oh, I knew Tunisia would fall. Well, I can tell you, I have been studying the Arab world all my life as a scholar, and before being a scholar, I was a child of the Arab world. If someone told me that Tunisia would fall, that Zain al-Abidin bin Ali, a tyrant, a policeman, he wasn't even an army officer, he was a police officer who had really destroyed any independent powers in Tunisia. If you told me that a young man in a hard-scrabble, forgotten, forlorn village would set himself ablaze, just a fruit vendor would get slapped in public, he would set himself ablaze and set this whole revolution in the Arab world, it would have been unthinkable. No science fiction writer could dream of this. But this young man, Mohammed Bouazizi, sets himself on fire in Tunisia, and this fire spreads literally and figuratively to other lands. And you have the Egyptians who suddenly look at the Tunisians and they feel a case of Tunisia envy. They're shamed by the upheaval in Tunisia. 80 million Egyptians for 10 million Tunisians. And Tunisia was a forgotten country in the Arab world. Egypt is the heart of the Arab world. So the revolution doesn't begin in the heart of the Arab world, it begins on the outer limbs of the Arab world and it spreads everywhere.
You mentioned Egypt is the heart of the Arab world. I think a lot of Americans don't know that. They say, well, what about Saudi Arabia? What about Syria? Why is Egypt the heart?
Well, good luck to the other Arab countries. I have a friend, an Egyptian friend, late Egyptian friend, who once said, forget about these Arab countries. They're tribes with flags. There is only Egypt. Look, Egypt is, first of all, take the demography of the Arab world. 80 million of the 300 and some 50 million Arabs are Egyptians. The cinema, it began in Egypt. The novel, it began in Egypt. Modern life began in Egypt. And Egypt entered the world very early, in the middle years of the 19th century, entered the modern world. And Egypt led the Arab world. It had the largest army. It had the first attempt to industrialize in a big way, the first opera house. And ever since the Suez Canal was dug in the 1860s, the world of the Arabs centered around Egypt.
You mentioned earlier the youth of Egypt. It is a very young country.
Absolutely.
Demographically, it has an almost astounding amount of young people.
You know, you have populations where the bulk of the population is under 18. And then you have these aging autocrats. Like take Mubarak himself, he's 83. Zain al-Abidin bin Ali in Tunisia, he was in his mid-70s. And then even Mubarak, when he turns around and said, how can I please my people? How can I call off this revolt? Why don't I name a vice president? He names a vice president in his mid-70s. There is a gap between the rulers and the ruled. And there is an anger of the youth. And there is also a strange phenomenon. In all Arab countries of this kind of regime, Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Syria, a man rose from the underclass, seized power, and then got hold of the country, looted it completely, and began to dream that this country is his. And so the young people standing, roaming the streets of Cairo or Alexandria, they look at the privilege of the rulers of Egypt, and they wonder, what's their share of this world? When will their share of the rewards of life come to them? And that's what this revolt is all about.
Well, in traveling the Middle East, whether you go to Iraq, Egypt, Tunisia, Lebanon, the number of young people unemployed is sort of startling.
Yes. Well, the Arab world, we're told, needs to produce 50 million new jobs, and we understand how difficult job creation is in our own country here in the United States. So the Arab world has to produce 50 million jobs to accommodate the young people of the Arab world, and they cannot do it. And they cannot do it. And something else has also happened in the last decade, or particularly after 9/11. It's become very difficult for young Arabs to leave the Arab world. There had always been the safety valve. You could go to Europe, you could come to America, you could go to Australia. And as the story of terrorism began to bedevil the Arabs, again, these young people couldn't flee anymore. They couldn't leave Cairo, Alexandria. They couldn't go to Italy and Spain and England and the United States. It's become harder. And now they have to endure these troubles at home. It's like a hothouse completely.
Well, let's talk about our beloved United States of America. Obviously in an awkward situation, given the current events in Egypt. Here's a regime that we've supported for 30 plus years, and the regime before that we supported.
Absolutely.
What are we Americans to do?
Well, we are not on liberty's side. We have to accept that. We are not on liberty's side. We are the great liberal power. We are the great power that believes in our own self-image. We believe we are a force for emancipation in the world. But there is a truth about the American position in the Arab world. We are the backers and the friends of autocracy. And here, in this moment, in 2011, as the Arab world is burning, we're trying to catch up with this storm. We're trying to adjust our policies to it. But this is not unique. I mean, go back to the summer of 2009 when Iran erupted. We also tried to catch up with the Iranians, and we couldn't even find the language to identify with the Green Movement and the Iranian people. So our own claims that we actually back liberty are being tested. We have this problem of adjusting to the anger in the Arab world and to the change in the Arab world, and we were late. We are trying to catch up with something that's moving with enormous speed. And we're afraid. That's the other issue.
Indeed we are. And I hear some people say, this could be Iran 1979.
Yes.
Had a revolution, threw out a dictator who was backed by the United States, and we see what came in the wake of that. Possible, probable will happen in Egypt?
Well, I think it's always, people are always fighting the last war. You know, we didn't do very well in 1978, 79. And I think the worst thing we can do about Egypt today is try to fit it into this Iranian straitjacket and say, well, Iran worked out this way, Egypt will work out this way. We don't know. The honest answer is we don't know. And in fact, for all the people who pretend to be experts, including this particular person speaking now, no one really has a script for these revolutions. Mubarak has no script. He doesn't know what's going on. And the rebels have no script. They've entered history's uncertainty.
What do we know of anything about Al-Qaeda in Egypt? And are they involved in this?
Well, I think we don't know much about Al-Qaeda. We don't think it has a role. We do know that Al-Qaeda's ranks are filled with very militant Egyptians. In fact, if you go back to the origins of Al-Qaeda, there was, of course, bin Laden, and he brought the money from Saudi Arabia. And there was Ayman Zawahiri, and he brought the military experience and the passions. So many people from Al-Qaeda are Egyptians. Now, will these Egyptians want to go home to fish in these troubled waters? Of course, it's to be expected.
Possibility, probability that some kind of radical Islamic government will come into being?
I would, if I were to, to make just a guess on my own, I think the army prevails. This state of Egypt, the Egyptian state, is really is built around the army. The army rules Egypt. And the army seized power in 1952 in the person of Nasser and then Sadat, and then out of the military establishment came this unknown man, Hosni Mubarak. He had no political past, people don't know him. It's a huge army, it's a huge officer corps. It's very much committed to the modernity of Egypt. And if I were to look at Egypt that I have known, the army would never permit the Islamists to take over the state, because the state and its economy and its power belongs to the army.
But as you say, we've entered the history of uncertainty.
Absolutely.
As has Egypt.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Israel.
Sure.
Hosni Mubarak may not have been Israel's favorite, but they've had a peace treaty that's held for 30 years.
Sure.
He's been useful to Israeli security, to Israeli diplomacy. What does Israel do?
Well, Israel can do nothing. And I think what they're doing is just right. As Prime Minister Netanyahu said, we are listening but not talking. They can't do anything. They can't do anything for anybody in Egypt. And what's interesting about this rebellion in Egypt, no one has actually said anything about Israel. No one, these crowds protesting are not saying, oh, Mubarak is a traitor because he keeps the peace with Israel. The peace was made by the man who paid dearly for the peace, Anwar Sadat. And all Mubarak did is he kept the peace. And his successor, let's say it's Omar Suleiman, this vice president. In truth, the Israelis don't deal with Mubarak as much as they deal with Omar Suleiman, the head of intelligence. They're all friends of his. I think the Egyptians, again, that's just one man's judgment on these matters. The Egyptians have made a decision. Wars with Israel are unworthy of them, and they can't win them. And they are the way and the road to ruin.
How much of a role do you think the internet and television played in fueling these protests?
Well, since I'm a technophobe, I don't know anything. I don't know what Twitter is. I have no idea what Facebook is. So you're just asking the wrong person. But
you're around young people all the time
I
as
am.
a teacher.
As a professor, you're exactly right. I think it made a lot of difference. Because the essence of tyranny, and you've kicked around tyrannical countries for decades, looking at different countries and how they're governed. The essence of tyranny is the loneliness that people feel, because there is this kind of, what the dictator does, he eats the institutions between the dictator and the people. And every person feels alone, facing Pharaoh, facing the despot, with all his awesome power and money and armies and secret police. What these new technologies have done, they've conquered that sense of loneliness. That people now can actually get around Pharaoh. And one Egyptian writer said, we remember when Egypt had 3 newspapers, and the only access people had was to the truth of the regime, and it's 3 newspapers and 1 television station. And what did the television station tell you? It told you what Nasser wanted you to know, what Sadat wanted you to know, what Mubarak wants you to know. Now, no one needs to listen to the media of the
What an
ruler.
interesting point with the internet and with satellite television.
Absolutely.
All kinds of things come from the outside. No longer do you feel alone, isolated, fearful. You're part of a community, an electronic community.
It's exactly right. And here's an interesting thing. The day that the Egyptians dubbed the Day of Anger, the day that the Mubarak regime began to come apart, I love this. I wish someone could find it. The cover, the front page of Al-Ahram, the leading paper of the regime, had a big story with a big banner headline. And what did the banner headline say? demonstrations in Lebanon.
In Lebanon?
In Lebanon. So, in fact, if you're an Egyptian, your lead newspaper ignored what exactly was going on in people's lives at that time.
If you had to pick one thing that you want the American people to know about what has happened recently and is happening in Egypt, what would it be?
I think I would like the American people to think that at a time when Egypt exploded, at a time when its people went into the street to contest a despot, and they didn't raise any slogans against Israel, any slogans against America. They didn't say Islam is a solution. They just were saying, get out to a despot. Our diplomacy was caught flat-footed.
But in Egypt, you've seen our embassy there. It has to be one of, if not the largest, most elaborate embassies filled with decent, intending, wanting to do the right thing Americans. How can this be?
You know, I don't know. I mean, you're so right. And I think you've used the right image about this. You know, we are like, our embassy is like the high commissioner in Egypt. I mean, we are active there. We have a huge agency of international development. We have spies everywhere. We have massive cooperation between our military and the Egyptian military. But look at the end, how little we knew Egypt. So I think we were displaying both this kind of, that sometimes power is blind, that we actually are in these places, but we don't really know them fully, because we don't, it's like there are only few Egyptians we know. There are some institutions in the United States, which I'm not going to name them, but they feel so comfortable with Mubarak and his son that the only Egyptians we've tended to know are the regime and its people and its beneficiaries. They're sophisticated, they can come here on their own, they have private planes, they have treasure they loot, they can go to the World Economic Forum at Davos, where the masters of the universe meet every year. And in fact, the world has nothing to do with these kinds of elites. These young people who went out in Alexandria, these young people chanting, "Get out," to Mubarak, they are not, we don't know them. We don't listen to them. We have no access to them. So yes, our shadow lies over that region, but our understanding of it is extremely shallow, and it's been shown to be so.
Our power is too often blind.
Yeah, and power is this way. Like, in fact, the weak understand power because they watch power. Power doesn't watch the weak because power is obsessed with itself and obsessed with other powerful people.
Fuad, as always,
thank you.
We learned a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Fuad Ajami. I'll be back with some closing thoughts on another write-in campaign that made history in just a moment. Welcome back. We began tonight with a look at Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski and her improbable write-in campaign. When covering elections, one always looks for a little bit of historical perspective, and many commentators noted that Murkowski was the first write-in candidate to win election to the Senate since Strom Thurmond of South Carolina in 1954. It's a nice little factoid, but few explored the story behind that election more than 50 years ago, and the parallels it holds for today's politics. By 1954, Strom Thurmond had staked his reputation as a defender of the Old South. Like almost all Southern politicians of the time, he was a Democrat in a very different Democratic Party from today. In those days, there were very few Republicans in the South, since to be Republican was to be from the party of Abraham Lincoln, not popular in the states of the former Confederacy. Yet party identities were changing, and after President Harry Truman, a Democrat, desegregated the Army and pushed for other early civil rights acts, segregationist Thurmond broke with his party and ran for president in 1948 under the banner of the States' Rights Democratic Party. He carried 4 Southern states. Thurmond alienated the Democrats again in 1952 when he supported Republican Dwight David Eisenhower for president. So when incumbent South Carolina U.S. Senator Bernard Maybank died just weeks before the 1954 election, and the state Democratic Party had to rush to find a replacement on the ballot, they passed over old Strom, whom they considered a bit of a disloyal renegade. Instead, they settled on State Senator Edgar A. Brown. Thurman ran as a write-in, and he had a lot of support, including some local newspapers that instructed voters how to write in Thurman's name. On election night, Thurman was all smiles. He had won big and would serve South Carolina in the Senate for more than 47 years. Thurman ended up leaving the Democratic Party for good in 1964 over the issue of civil rights. And since that time, the South has gone from solidly Democratic to the base of the modern Republican Party. The story of Strom Thurmond shows that even as the ideology of political parties change, old identities die hard. It remains to be seen whether Republican moderates can stage a resurgence in the age of the Tea Party, or whether senators like Murkowski increasingly will find that the party they joined is no longer the party they represent. And that's our program for tonight. From New York, for HDNet, Dan Rather reporting. Good night. If you would like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net.